This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Hey, before we get started, I'm going to make an observation.
Oh no.
And so I'm a trained observer, right? So I spent 34 years observing stuff. And just the other day, I realized this. When I take a drink of my coffee, my cup flings out my entire face.
It's a big cup.
It's a big cup because I got a big head. But
what did you watch back one of our videos? And
no, I was just watching. I was just looking at it when I was on another, like a Zoom call or something the other day, and I picked up my coffee and I go, I'm blocking out my entire face. So I should probably switch my cups to one that is.
I mean, even this one, Coffee with Kelly one, it takes up.
Yeah, I guess it does. I need a sippy cup.
It's all perspective.
Yeah, I need a sippy cup.
Because if I go like this, I can have it take up the whole thing. But if I hold it way back here, it's.
Yeah, but as soon as you tip it up, it covers your face.
Yep.
So maybe I need a sippy cup. What are we talking about today?
I'm gonna throw my wife underneath the bus here a little bit just to make her laugh, but she forced me to make sure I still knew how to use a ratchet strap to tow a car out of the snow. She leaves for work this morning, and then very shortly after I get a call, and she goes, "I'm stuck." Okay, there wasn't really a whole lot of snow on the driveway, so we have a dirt driveway, and sometimes it's better just to let it sit there. It's not worth snow blowing and stuff. I'm like, man, there wasn't a whole lot of snow. Like, how'd you get stuck? I go out there and the left rear of the vehicle is buried in like the side snowbank that had been built up by snowplows over the course of the winter. So like very thick, solid 4.5, 5 foot snowbank, just wedged right in there.
How'd she get there?
She went way too far off the driveway.
She went off. She wasn't like doing donuts in the snow and stuff.
She's very used to. So she's been driving our SUV. It's easier to put the two kids in there. So she used to be driving her truck that has a backup camera. So she was so used to using a backup camera and not the mirrors. The SUV is an older car. It does not have a backup camera. So I walked out there and I'm like, yeah, you're like really stuck. I'm like, you did a great job getting yourself stuck. So
you use a ratchet strap to do that?
Yeah.
To pull her out?
I just tied her around the hitch of the
heavy
trailer hitch. Heavy duty enough. I mean, it's just you just need enough to.
Yeah. You're not pulling the whole weight unless you're pulling the whole weight. But...
Yeah. I gave her instructions on how to.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a good time. All right. Just to give you a little fun intro there. All right, so we'll start with one article. We're going to do a few here and then transition into the main body of the podcast. So first one this is pretty interesting. A student was accused of more than a dozen threats to a school. So to keep it short here, it was after 12 threats that's when.
Over a period of time, though, right?
Over a period of time, a couple months. And then he was eventually put into a juvenile corrections type of deal. So apparently it takes 12 times to, if you want to know.
We talked a little bit about this earlier, but when was he arrested? Just recently?
So the article was on March 3rd yesterday, so
So relatively recently, right?
Relatively recently, I think.
But this started well over a month ago, right?
Yeah.
A couple months ago. So it was in late December, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
So so this is I want to bring this back up because I do think it's important and we need to continue talking about this so that there's more understanding of the differences of different levels of threat. And when law enforcement gets involved, and I don't know when law enforcement got involved, the first time they learned about a threat, because sometimes there's threats that are made that are very low level and they
Mm.
don't elevate themselves to uh, that level where law enforcement might even get involved, right?
Right.
Right. So, but at some point, somebody's going to say, we got to call the cops on this one, right?
Mm.
So, depending on how that all transpires, you might have several individual incidences of threats, but only one or two of them reach that level where of that level of concern where law enforcement is brought in. And vice versa, the law enforcement is dealing with a criminal threshold that has to meet generally very strict statutory requirements. And if they don't meet one of those, they can't make an arrest. Now, we get into the the difference in terminology and understanding the language because this has happened several times with people who had actually conducted an actual act of violence
Mm.
for by whatever means, right? By
Right, and
stabbing
then they go
or
back and say, "Hey, this
say
person made all these threats. Why didn't you address it here?"
right, and we missed
Yeah.
this opportunity. Why didn't
Mhm.
you? Well, we didn't see any threat. Well, law enforcement is if we don't have a crime, we don't have a problem. In law enforcement, we have to get away from that sort of mentality. There may not be something that meets the threshold where you can take custody of that person, but is there something else we can do? Like tell the school, hey, we had this interaction and we need to talk about that, get with the school and talk about that threat. And, people often hide behind this sort of student confidentiality, juvenile, blah, blah, blah. A lot of those restrictions have exemptions when they're talking about threats of violence towards another person or an institution like a school. So there's a lot of leeway when we're talking about acts that require us to communicate with somebody else to prevent something from happening.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think law enforcement does fail a fair amount because they see it as this very clearly defined line of demarcation. If it's not his, we don't have a threat. You have a threat, it just hasn't reached that line yet, right? And so when you look at the pathway to violence, we see this. There are threats being established at different levels along that pathway. So depending on where those 12 are, you might have low level, medium level, medium level, medium level. And then finally, at some point, it comes up to this, oh my God, we got to do something about it, right? Type of level. That being said, let me start by saying this. If it had this natural progression and there was this collaboration between all of the parties involved, the schools, the parents, the district office, the law enforcement agencies, and so forth, and they took this step, now it prevented something, right? So it had its desired results. Naturally, we want to say, really, it took 12 threats.
Yeah.
So that's what we naturally want to say is, so you get the first 12 for free, but you have to pay for the 13th one. What's the deal, right? But it's never that cut and dry. And so without knowing all of the actions that were taken, is it appropriate? It could be. This could be the actual natural progression of the the student or whatever walking down that pathway, or maybe it's a late identification or something like that. But I'm not too alarmed because one, nothing happened, and two, something happened that prevented it from happening in the future. So that's kind of what those assessments are
Mm.
for. It's just that the reason I think we should continue to talk about this is that one, oftentimes it does take several incidences It's not just here it is, you're going to jail. There's much more dynamics, and
we'd live in a very different world if
that's right.
that was
That's
the
right.
case.
Yeah, but it's important to understand that there are different levels, and a criminal threat or a terror, what we call in California, a terroristic threat, is a pretty high threshold. But
Mm.
we still need to communicate, hey, this is happening. We need to discuss and get a plan, because unless we do something, we intervene somehow, whether it's at the school level, at a probation level, at a child protective services level, maybe. If it's at some other level, we need to start doing something, at least planning for what happens if they reach this level. Good on them for figuring it out, and we'll make the assumption that they did it correctly, and because we don't have anything to the contrary. It just sounds like 12 times, literally, that could be just the natural progression of the case.
Well answered. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome, Ethan. I
Maybe
earned
I
my
don't.
money today.
Maybe I don't say that enough. I don't know. Um. All right. So we'll go to the next one. This one's pretty crazy to me. Also very recently, a couple days ago. At least this is when the article was published. I think the event actually happened in January. I think it happened in January. A 15-year-old autistic kid got stabbed in the shoulder and in the face after being bullied. So, if that's not bad enough, the parent found out through the brother or the sibling at least.
Not the school district is what you're saying.
Not initially the school district.
So let me ask you this: does it say how, like, if you're stabbed in the face and you're stabbed in the shoulder, was it at school?
Yeah, it says in the hallway.
So how do they not get notified? Go pick up your kid at the hospital? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
like I don't like I have to play devil's advocate. Like, did the sibling just like immediately call the parent on the phone? Because it says the sibling witnessed it, so maybe they picked up the phone and called the parent like right then and there. Like, okay, then maybe give the school some grace there with like, okay, like
but there was no communication from the school. Is that what it's saying? No communication from the school to the parent as a result of this incident. Is that right? I mean, I almost don't know, how do you not make some communication? Maybe it wasn't what they were expecting,
yeah,
or maybe it was the status of the investigation or the discipline or whatever was happening at the school and or criminally. I don't know. So when we were talking about that article a wee bit, there was another one that I saw where there was an incident in a girl's locker room where two girls attacked a third girl. And the reason for the attack was stated that there was an ICE/Trump supporter ideology in here, right? So as the clip that was shown, the videos, was that the boyfriend of the girl that got assaulted was posting pro Trump, pro ICE postings in support of those two entities. And the girlfriend was confronted, and this altercation that was videotaped was, are you a supporter? Are you this? Are you that? And then the attack occurred. So, and again, I'm not stating politics here. I'm stating that this is what was reported. When they showed the article, one of the main statements for the purpose of the article was that the school didn't contact the victim's parents for 5 days.
that's
And
crazy.
so there was a national organization that heard about this
Oh
and
man,
called the school to find out the status. And it was shortly thereafter that the school said, or it was shortly thereafter that the parents were contacted. It was 5 days later, and it was like it was reported. So I don't know what the actual circumstances were. It was reported that it was shortly thereafter that says, "Oh, by the way, we had this incident with your daughter, and the police are investigating." And that was essentially the extent of the contact from the school. But it was 5 days later.
From the
So
point that they knew?
from the point, well, it was videotaped, and I don't know exactly when they knew about it, but you would think that that would be all over the school very quickly. I remember
Yeah.
even back in the day, long before social media, how
Yeah.
quickly
Stuff like that spreads.
a fight that broke out, how quickly that spread throughout the school, even in Southern California, where we had 2,500 students in the school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can't imagine that some school official didn't hear about this. That would be almost completely unheard of in my world.
Yeah. So my takeaway from that as a parent is just just communicate as quickly as you can, no matter how hard that communication may be. It's a lot better just to be upfront
But,
and say, "Hey, this happened. Here's what we're doing to X, Y,
right.
Z." Whatever.
And uh,
Like, I don't care. Just tell me, give me something.
yep.
Don't
And
ignore it. Don't lie to me. Like, oh man.
yeah. And so this is where we're going to start seeing more and more issues, I think, one way or the other,
Well, it's
because
it's it's interesting that you say that because we have another article.
we do. We do.
We do. I didn't want you to
Yeah.
forget.
Yep. Let's go to that one
All
so that we
right.
can get into the meat and potatoes.
Man, this is a good one. We're on Article 3.
3,
We're really working hard for you guys here.
right?
So,
As we sit here drinking coffee.
yeah. So probably the thing that everyone has heard about, it's been plastered pretty much on every single news thing,
Mhm.
is the attack in Austin, Texas, where this article says 2 people, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 people now that died and then 14 injured, where a 53-year-old reportedly like drove up on the outside of this,
Mhm.
the bar, and a first shot with a pistol at the bar, and then parked, and then pulled out a rifle and started shooting. And it's interesting in this article. It almost alludes like one of the things here says that like he shot but then like walked away or something, and then they were like, oh, if he had come back it would have been worse. Like if the police hadn't intervened or something and he came
Yep.
back, it would have been worse. And
Yeah.
it almost seemed like they stayed there, like the people that had been shot at with the pistol continued to stay in the building. Like
Well,
they
where are you
didn't.
going to go, right? So,
Is there like a
but
back door? Like
yeah, maybe.
anywhere else?
But
This is what we always talk about, right?
what's the edict though, right? Run, hide, fight. What's the protocol? Run, hide, fight. So if you think you're hiding, that's where you're going to be. You're going to pick one, and that's what it's going to be.
So, anyways, it's about all the news is reporting. So I guess I'm just gonna say like they're trying to figure out if he had some terroristic motivation behind it because of
Uh,
the articles of clothing that he
yeah.
was wearing.
So obviously over the weekend, this past weekend of the end of February to beginning of March, the U.S. attacked Iran. Regardless of where you stand on that, does beg us to be diligent and vigilant about what we do and where we do it, because I'm guessing the longer this conflict goes, the more likely we're going to see a spike in violence.
This was an adult and just went after a bar, not a school.
Mhm.
It was very close to the Texas University. It's like 2 miles away.
Mhm.
Do you suspect that we'd only see this kind of uh, violence on like community in the communities, or do you suspect that we're going to see things like fights or anything like that escalate in the school environment?
So, good question. I think we're going to see a spike in several different aspects of violence, right? It's going to depend on where you are, what your motivation is, what your commitment is. But we can establish this, right? So, in this particular instance, it was near a university where there was a very bustling nightlife. So, the downtown bar area, which is visited by whom?
Students,
College students, right?
college students.
college students, right? And so, or that age bracket, right? Even if they're not college students, it's that young adult, either just barely or maybe not even, but legally able to drink is going to be that kind of that crowd, right? And coincidentally, the incident that I was involved in was just that. It was in an area that had a lot of nightlife, a lot of, it wasn't a necessarily dense area with a lot of bars and stuff, but all of the college students had parties. So there was a high density of these college parties. Similar circumstances, little bit different in where they were at, but a lot of people gathering to drink and have a good time. So you're going to see that, but you're also going to see, I think, festivals. We're going to see community events, especially the longer we get into the conflict, the longer the conflict goes, because the longer it goes, the more likelihood that we're going to see some sort of retaliation or supporters of the current regime, and they're going to take it out on the populace. And it also goes to, just for pointing out, we have a huge population of Muslims that may be in support of. I'm not saying I'm not anti-Islamic, but we have a large population that are very committed. Let's say that.
Yeah, there's Muslim and there's Islam, so
right?
it's a subset. So
yeah. So, but
it
there's
kind of goes both ways. Like
ways.
it's not.
Yeah, it's not every Muslim or Islamic person's gonna get into that.
Right.
But with the increase of the population, you get the increase of the potential, right? And that's all I'm saying is there's this increase in potential, and we have to plan for it. We have to look at what we're doing and how we're enjoying ourselves, right? That's kind of a weird statement, but we have to look at, and again, I'm not telling people to stop doing what they're doing. In fact, I'm encouraging it. You should continue on with your life, but be vigilant. If something doesn't look right, then move on. Don't be there. It's very simple to say, you know what, something just doesn't feel right. And if you're right, good on you. If you're wrong, oh well, you drank somewhere else, right? Or you didn't
you
drink.
Went somewhere else. You
You went
existed
somewhere
else.
right? Yeah. So there's very little negative consequences if you are vigilant and you act upon your your intuition of, wow, this doesn't, something's not right tonight. Yeah, I'm gonna, or like in this instance, you know what? That was the fourth time that truck went around this block, right?
You know, probably not a lot of people would notice that. I think only like you, maybe me, would even.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you're like out in the, if there was like an outside table area, you'd be more likely to see it. But like if you're inside, I don't think
But
a lot of people are going to
that's what
recognize
vigilance
that.
is.
Right. That's
Right.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. We need to be more vigilant. We need to be more aware of what's happening around us right now. And a lot of people would say hyper vigilant. I'm not sure that what I do is hyper vigilant, but I notice things. But I've been sort of training myself to do that for 40 years, 45, almost 45 years. Isn't that crazy? But the idea is understanding what's going on, what's in your environment, what's normal, and when that normality changes, right? So, and this is directly out of the book Left of Bang. And how do you understand where the baseline is set? What is the baseline behavior? Most of us have an idea of what that is. And we can quickly, as humans, say, you know what? This doesn't feel right. Something's different tonight. Something's going on. I don't like it. So bug out. No harm, no foul. And the problem is when we're in a new situation and we haven't established a baseline, right? So understanding what the baseline is important, but you can figure out what that baseline is pretty quick when you start looking around. And when I say pretty quick, only a few minutes if you're practiced at it. And because you will see somebody or something that happens that's out of the norm, and you just go, ooh, that's not right. And when I say out of the norm, universally out of the norm. There are things that are not normal that only somebody who is well versed in that, on that baseline in that area, oh, that's just normal. That just happens every day. But then they see something and you go, huh, something's not right. Like, there's not a lot of people here today. Normally there's hundreds of people, and now there's only a few. Something's going on.
Mm.
Something's happening, right? And it could be explained away. But if it makes you feel uncomfortable, just say, you know what, maybe tonight's not the night, right? Maybe I need to be somewhere else. That's all we're saying. But have a plan is really what we're looking at, is understanding what that baseline is and looking. And then if you see somebody who's going around and around and around the block several times, you might not notice it the first time. You probably should see, oh, that truck just went by. Oh, this is the third time that went by. Huh, that's not. And he's not looking for a parking space, because you can tell when somebody's looking for a parking space, as opposed to
Mm.
looking at the crowds and not paying attention to the traffic, not looking for a spot along up ahead of them. Those types of behaviors. But they're looking 90 degrees, either left or right, where the people are. One time, all right, let's see what the crowds look like. Let's see if they look okay for me. But when you do it a second and a third time, probably something's not right. Maybe that's a time to leave. Maybe that's a time to say, hey guys, let's take this back to the house,
Mhm.
right? Something like that. So that's what we're saying. And I think when you look at this potential from a safety perspective, we're not just looking at it from the school perspective, right?
Yeah.
And when we look at this, it unfortunately, this is a community issue. So when we start looking at, and frankly, this is kind of where we are headed, is targets of opportunity exist throughout our community. And if we are not aware of those potential targets of opportunity and we don't treat them with the same sort of diligence and the same sort of mindset that we are with our schools, it's naturally going to spread through that community. And so I think we as a company, we're already doing it. But I think as individuals, as responsible citizens, that we have to look into really being more, I'm going to say, aggressive at protecting our citizens, our places of gathering, whether it's a bar, whether it's a sporting event, whether it's a festival, a church service.
Mm.
I just think that we're going to see, I mean, it really, really, to me, is dependent on the length of the conflict and the veracity of the conflict. But that being said, we have a history of doing things and then somebody waiting and doing it later, coming up with a plan and attacking us later. So this is something I don't think is going away. I think this is
No.
I think this is just the way that this world has evolved. This is where we're getting to. So unfortunate, but I think it's reality. And I think we have to work through, how do we protect ourselves as a community, not as school safety people, but as community safety people. How do we get those tools into the community? You and I have learned a lot in the last, me
Yeah.
a lot longer than Ethan, obviously, but we've learned a lot about safety, and we've learned a lot about practices and gaps and stuff like that. And I think we
Mm.
just have to look at, how do we close those gaps, and how do we take what we've learned in, and that we're still learning, and take it out of the school silo, vertical, whatever you want to call it, and expand that into the community. And I think that's, one thing about Crisis Go is that we're doing that, and we'd be remiss if we didn't spread what we learned, what
Yeah.
we have learned.
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's the mission is you're just trying to
uh,
protect people.
right, we're trying to keep our communities, our schools safe, right? And we've talked about this before. Schools are such an integral part of what it is that we do. You can't separate the school from the community or the community from the school. You just can't. And we've been playing in this sort of this little island that this is the school and the ocean of the community surrounds this little island, but it's not.
Mhm.
They're so interconnected that you you can't separate the two. You can't leave the school without getting in to the community.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
can't.
just think about how, like, events, like, whether it's a safety related event happens at a school or something like that happens outside of the school,
Right,
they influence each other
right.
almost every time.
Every time. I mean, we've talked about this many times where we had an incident at a school that impacted the community.
Mhm.
And we had this specifically this one incident where there was a domestic related homicide at a party in our community. It was at a party that had a lot of children that attended our schools. And I don't remember the numbers, but it wasn't just the elementary school that was 2 blocks away. It was the high schools, it was the middle schools, it was some of the charter schools, because there were a couple hundred, not families, but people who lived in this apartment complex. A lot of those people had kids. So
Mm.
now those kids are different ages. So you had kids from the same family. One went to elementary school, one went to middle school, one was in high school. And it was just this unique dynamic for me because I had never seen it play out that way. And so we ended up we put our services at the elementary school because it was the school closest to the actual incident. So we would get the bigger impact of our services by putting them there, but we put counseling services and other resources, how to gain access to these other resources that were available to them at the closest elementary school. But we also put out sort of outreach people to the other schools saying, hey, this just happened. If you need anything, give us a call. That kind of thing. But it impacted several schools. And we tried to make direct outreach to those that we knew were in that complex that were students of ours. But then we also had to look at the larger community where we had students that were friends of those kids that were impacted. And some of the kids, I mean, the victims of the violence had children. And so we had that support that was ongoing for and probably still ongoing. I don't know, but they were young kids at the time. So I'm sure that there's some sort of support there. But the point of that is we just have this very tight connection, whether you know it or not. If something happens in a school, it's going to impact your community. There's no way around it. And if something happens in your community, it's likely going to impact your school. Not 100% like the other way around, but it's likely going to impact your school. So,
I mean, just going back to what we just talked about the events that's transpired over the weekend with Iran, it's like that happened on the other side of the world,
world.
and you will see a change in your students. Their students are gonna pick a side. Their
Mhm.
tensions are gonna be high. It's gonna be the same,
Yep.
you know?
And they're seeing what's playing out on TV. There's violence
Mhm.
in the streets because the opposing sides are clashing, and
Yeah.
that's starting, and that's going to start to escalate. And you're just going to start seeing this. It's crazy times that we're living in, and it's unfortunate, but we're going to see people who are acting out violently. I think, increase. And I think that we need to start addressing that. And if we're going to come out of this on the other side mostly whole, then we need to figure that out quickly. So again, I think we're, as a company, we're working through that pretty well, pretty quickly. So stay tuned for that. But I do think it's going to require all of us sitting down at the same table. And when I say all of us, all of those that have responsibility for keeping our kids at school safe and our community safe. And how do we bridge that gap? How do we bring that together? And more to come on that. But I do think that we're starting to bridge that gap. We have the tools to bridge that gap. And now it's just getting people to understand what that problem is. And that problem is I have my piece, you have your piece, they have their piece. When right now, and I'll bring it this way, is in order for us to have a much safer community, we have the elements there. We have the schools, we have law enforcement, we have the fire departments, the emergency medical services, the emergency managers, we have the hospitals, we have all of those elements that are there. But we're still in this response mode. We're still waiting for something to happen to activate ourselves into doing what we do. The problem is we don't have the prior relationships. We don't have the connections with those who are coming to help us. And we need to understand that when you press that button, we've talked about this before. How do you communicate? What do you communicate? How do they want to be communicated with? We have to have all of that. And that's got to be our plans. Every school district in the United States, every public school district anyway, has an emergency operations plan. That I'm going to go out on a limb here, for a majority of them, they were likely done without the collaboration with all of the partners that would show up if you press that button, right? So one of the things that we are tackling currently at Crisis Go is that we have identified who's responsible at the school level. We know who that is. Safety directors, principals, superintendents, school boards, right? Across the board. Those people are responsible for the safety of those schools. Who's responsible for the safety of our community? Our first responders, law enforcement, fire, medical services. Who's responsible for bringing everyone together? Who's in charge of that? That's what we're tackling. That's what
I guess we are, because we identified the problem.
Well, we define the problem. I think people have identified it. Okay. That there's a problem, but we're the ones that said, you know what, this is what the problem is, and this is how we're going to solve that problem. And that's what we're working on right now. And I think this is going to be a big thing for us professionally as a company, but I think it's bigger for the community. And I think when we start bringing it out, the product we call Crisis Go Connect is that, right? Is how do we take the lessons learned and bring them to the community? So if you want information on that, please give us a call, but that's where we're headed. So hoorah for us. Hoorah for you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.